Hey friends, JB back with another episode of Cyber Christ and Country. And I just hope that you are having a super fantastic day. And I hope that you've got the Lord in your heart. All of you friends out there who are Christian brothers and sisters, and you're a little bit uncertain about what privacy is, today's episode is for you. Today, I'm going to explain what information privacy is. It's also known as data privacy or personal data. What is this? Okay. So, you are going to get enough knowledge to start to understand what it is exactly, how it might even affect your organization, how it may affect your ministry, and how you have to deal with it now, there's a whole lot going on when it comes to data privacy, and data privacy is part of the cyber paradigm, right? Remember yesterday we had talked about what is cyber? Well, today we're talking about what is privacy. So this is going to take, remember, before the cyber is the information really attached to the program, which is essentially run on some device. Okay, and today we're gonna speak about the privacy concerns. Now, this information privacy or data privacy is the ability to control the information or data that is attributed to you. This may be suppressing the publication of that information, including the information that you create. So if let's break that down just a little bit. Let's unpack that because there's a lot going on there. What does it mean? What does it mean to the ability to control the information that is attributed to you? So your name, okay, your name, your email address, your phone number. In the past, there was a time when that information seemed to be on the loose and public knowledge in many areas, especially phone numbers. You had to go so far as to pay the phone company a fee just to suppress your information to the general public, and you never really felt like that information was getting out there. So, well, that stands to reason. Who decided that your information should be public in the first place? And let's take your name and address in the old white pages or whatever. So, who decided that? Well, really, some companies decided that that should be the case. And then they tacked on fees as a convenience fee to remove your information from the public. So then you became a little bit anonymous. But any public phone book that was printed with that information in it couldn't be removed because that's already out there floating around. So you may look at a phone book today, and then you check that phone book against, and your number's not in there because you had it removed. But if someone has phone books from years past, then that information is still there. So someone could still find you. Now, that could be for good reasons or not good reasons. Okay. Now, if you have a lot of friends and you have sort of an open relationship as far as with you and other people, you don't really have issues with weird people or big creditors or anything like that, then it seems like it's not a big deal. But let's just say you kind of got trapped into some of these quick credit card schemes, and before you knew it, your interest payment was ballooning outside of your means to pay it, and you're like, "Geez, I kind of would just like to have some peace while I try to pay this off. I still have people call me all the time, and now I'm on this big repository list." Well, of course, basically, it just made it easy back then for people to get in touch with you. But nowadays, it can be even easier because why? All of your information has been digitized and thrown on the web, and now everyone can search for it. I mean, think about what's going on right now when it comes to public information. In China, they're using that information to suppress the people over there as a way to control them. So if they're tagging their phone numbers to people and people to face recognition, and if they're seen doing something that's seen as a no-no to their communist regime, guess what? They get a poor social score, and they can't do things like ride a bus. They can't do things like process their payments and different things like this. Okay, and then the image that you're looking at right now, Google's own employees are starting to face some dilemmas. Okay, well, let's move past that for now. Let's put off that off to the side for now at least, and let's go into where data protection is starting to be driven from today. Now, today, we have the European Union. Now, love them or hate them, they've got this comprehensive, what's called General Data Protection Regulation, which has been, which extended other regulations on privacy that they had, um, and and essentially has made it more robust and more particularly enforceable. So, what does this General Data Protection Regulation do? Well, this General Data Protection Regulation protects all of the privacy information of European citizens. And so, let's say that a European citizen has their name and address information, some database such as like the whitepages.com, and many people remember the white pages that you would thumb through to find someone's phone number. Well, they put that online. I'm not even sure if it's the same company, but they put that online. And so if they wanted that information removed, the according to the European Union, they have the right to request that to be removed, or for them to stop processing. Now, the GDPR has a definition for personal data, which means information privacy, data privacy. Their definition is this: personal data means any information related to an identified or an identifiable natural person, data subject. So, data subject is you, okay, or the European Union citizen. Not if you're not in the European Union, it doesn't exactly apply to you. But let's read that first part again. Personal data means any information relating to an identified or an identifiable natural person. Now, I don't know what natural person means, but a person. And now let's further it defines it as an identifiable natural person who is one who can be identified directly or indirectly, in particular by reference to an identifier such as a name, an identification number, location data. So, right here with a few of these definitions, what I've already started to do was to start to talk about what it means to be what private data means to a particular person, etc. Okay. So now let's continue forward though. Let's continue forward because right now they said that your personal data is essentially things such as your name or your identification number or location data. So that means GPS. If they can associate the GPS to you, guess what? That means that that is your personal data. Okay, that becomes very, you're like, JB, how can they track that? Well, they're tracking it. People like Google and people like Twitter and all these places are tracking your information, even your GPS coordinates. Well, the European Union, the GDPR legislation, starts to rein that in. They say that your personal data is it's things like your name, identification number, location, and online identification identifier, such as your Facebook name or profile or a different profile. Okay. Let's see what else. More factors such as physical, psychological, genetic, mental, economic, cultural, or social identity of that natural person. Now, that just seems pretty broad and wide sweeping, doesn't it? I mean, pretty much everything is in this bucket here. Okay, but that's important to understand. And why do I say this is actually important? Because in many ways, the European Union, love them or hate them, support this or don't support it, have gotten a lot of detail and a lot of things right in many ways because of the nature of our society right now. Remember, they got the names, identification number, location data, online identifier, physical, psychological information, economic, cultural, social identity of that natural person. All of this is in there. And when you think about it, if you really study the topic of privacy, you study the topic of what it means to have personal information and information privacy, you will see that there is tie in. If you tie into all of these issues, tie into all of these areas, if you study Twitter, and how it interacts um, with Google, how it interacts with Facebook, and how they interact with these other companies who do this micro marketing, target marketing to try to identify what you're interested in or things that they want to sway you into believing, then what you realize is all of this information is wrapped right up inside your user profile somewhere, somehow. So the European Union has, I believe, correctly identified some of these as personal information and private information. Okay, things that are private. Now, in the United States, there are much fewer things that were considered private data. A couple of them, just brief, are your social security number. Everyone's kind of like, ooh, if someone gets that, they're going to get all my information. They're going to blow my credit because they're going to sign up for a credit card, swipe away, and then I'm going to be on the hook for it because it's my social security number. Okay, so that's private data. Um, Other things such as health information. Boy, I really don't want everyone to get my health information. Boy, if they just found out all that, they might think I'm nuts. Or maybe they may learn that I've had toe fungus in the past. Okay. All that private information. So that's what the US tends to think about private information, or at least did. Now they're starting to realize what it means a little bit more broadly. Now, the European Union has had legislation and guidance about data protection for many years, but it was never enforced. And any enforcement that they had was really loose and unorganized. And in addition, the enforcement would be done at the EU member state level. Okay, so it wasn't done kind of like we have a federal government in the United States, and they have laws that sort of overarching handles some things across the United States. Well, in the EU, they've got now sort of the same kind of federal oversight and federal enforcement. Now, this GDPR actually will make enforcing sweeping controls across the EU. Now, here's the kicker on the GDPR, just so you know, is that if the EU citizen is in the United States, not even in the EU, but let's say they're living in the United States and they have their private data on a U.S. company's website or in their database somewhere, okay? And that company may not even be as big of a Google, so it's not even let's just say it's not a global company per se, but it's really localized to a certain area in the United States. The EU can, in fact, enforce that law in the United States against that company. And the reason why is because we have Department of Commerce agreements and trade agreements that allows them to make such enforcements here in the United States. So that means that we're not even in the EU. A company in the United States exclusively has to abide by the EU General Data Protection Regulation. Wow. Did you ever think that a whole nother group of countries would their legislation would be controlling you here in the United States? Well, that's what's going on. That's what's going on, and they can do anything between um, fining you at different levels, 2% or 4% of your total revenue for the year. That's a huge amount. 2% or 4% of your total revenue for the year if you are in violation and they deem it to be to that level. Okay. That's like kind of like a max penalty is 4%. The other max penalty is this: they can force a stop processing order. So if your business depends upon processing data, which means anything, if you're maintaining their email address, it could mean processing data, all of the data. If that's what happens, they can stop your company from processing data just through their courts over there, and then finally making the connection with our courts over here to enforce that. And you may not even be in that whole country. You may be only doing business in New Orleans, Louisiana. You may only be doing business in Bismarck, but you could be forced to abide by the EU GDPR legislation. Scary stuff. Okay, scary stuff. But on the other hand, there's a lot of good things here. Now, what are we seeing here in the U.S.? Personal data. California has introduced very similar legislation, similar to GDPR, and now Congress is also looking into improved personal data legislation. I'm not debating right now the validity of having personal data, but I did want to point out that it's very interesting that the EU can fine U.S. companies, and that's a whole nother subject that we need to talk about. But that's kind of where we're going when it comes to this cyber world, the cyber era that we live in. We are in the cyber age, my friends. All right, this is very important. We are not nearly done, but what I want to share with you is a couple more things as it pertains to data privacy, okay? Because these are so important. These are so important for you. Um, let's look at a couple things that have gone on in the news. We were just looking at one. Google actually has what's called Dragonfly, and what that Dragonfly program does is it allows China to go ahead and censor the data of their citizens. It forces, China already has this super giant. It's called the Great Firewall of China, meaning that the firewall is a technical term, meaning that you can kind of like control what comes in and goes out, and you can do it at granular levels. But now Google's partnering up with some of the Chinese China government, the China Republic. Google is experiencing a moral crisis. Well, my friends, that's going to be expected if you don't have a moral framework to begin with, and I don't believe Google does. There are probably some Christians out there, but that moral compass is something totally different. Okay. America Thinker here talks a little bit about Google. Google's leadership is unquestionably strongly left biased. May not do it on the average, but at key points, it basically starts to their neutrality breaks down. We know that Google had. They read that's it reads here. We now know Google puts itself and its leftist politics first. I've read this article. It's very good. Now they're baked in with China. China is a totalitarian government. We do not want that over here. This is the Firefly, Google Firefly, that links to phones and phone numbers to you and your facial recognition and your social score, your social credit score is what they call it. Okay, so this is another article that speaks to the impact of privacy. Well, you're like, JB, what does this have to do? What does privacy have to do with China? What does privacy have to do with GDPR? You kind of explained the GDPR and what privacy is and how it's a law over in the EU. We explained that. Okay, we explained how the privacy is taking over in California and even in the Congress. They're trying to pass things right now too. But what does this all have to do with Google and other companies and privacy? They've got to fight that fight. What does it have to do? Well, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked a little bit more because right now we are in the cyber age, okay, but we're kind of at the beginning of the cyber age in some respect because companies do not yet have your information correctly tagged, meaning that when they look for your information they have to sort of figure out that your first name is this and your first name last name is that, and that your color of your eyes over here is your color of your eyes. Meaning that it's not always clear to these companies where your data is in their databases. So meaning that you have a bunch of things about you. Sometimes it gets thrown into their database, but they don't know exactly where it is or how to kind of like identify it. Some programs do it well. They have what's called a user master data that has all of your information in there, but oftentimes there's additional information, or oftentimes your information is sort of just thrown into what we call like the digital or the cyber garage. You know what your garage is? You kind of have a bunch of junk and you throw it in the garage and you just say, well, we'll sort it out later, or we'll clean the garage later, or organize the garage later, but for now it's going into the garage. Well, a lot of companies have kind of like a digital garage. They just kind of throw your information in there and really don't have any clear way of organizing it. Every now and again, they'll do a cleanup, but they're really not good at managing that information. Okay. So the digital garage, new term, coined it here, the digital garage. They throw it in there. Well, government cannot really figure out what's in the digital garage of companies. This is very important. Listen here. Government can't figure out where your personal data is if it's in the corporate digital garage. But now the government forced, okay, has forced companies to organize their digital garage in such a way that the government will be able to find it easily. Now, they do it in such a way as to show that, yeah, it's an important thing, privacy, the privacy information. Well, here's the kicker, okay? Privacy is important. It is important for everyone. Everyone wants to have a certain semblance of privacy control, data control, information privacy, okay? Personal privacy, they want that. And it's just to varying degrees, okay? Who wants more and who wants less, but we all want some. But companies, when now that they have your information and there's a mandate to know where your private data is, and on top of that, to be able to identify and to get your consent for the private information, that's a way of validating your private information. And then they have the obligation to scrub it or remove it, okay, or pseudonymize it in such a way that if they didn't want to do it, if you ever ask for your data to be scrubbed, you have an expectation on the company to be able to specifically locate your data in their digital garage and then go ahead and remove it. That's the premise. And you're like, JB, that sounds pretty good. To have a company, when I want my data removed, they know where it is, and then they are forced to remove it. Yeah, but you know what the deal is that with backups and with such a pool of information, it's very difficult for them to actually remove it. But what it does do, it does help companies organize their digital garage so that way when the government or the digital garage inspector comes around, they can grab your data at any time. Very convenient. You see, before this ruling, it was very difficult for the government to track it. Because guess who always has the right to your private data? Essentially, the government. Now they'll say that, well, if it's got to have a FISA warrant, or it's got to have a specific warrant for a search and seizure, whatever. You know, whatever that means. You know that if the government wants to make a case to get your personal information, they will make the case to get your personal information. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it is, and we've seen that time and time again. So the backlash, the downside, if you will, to having companies the expectation to organize their digital garage to secure your private data. The downside is that now it makes it exponentially easier for the government or anyone affiliated with the government, political bias included, to access your data and to obtain and understand who you are and to use that as what? Let's go back to Dragonfly. It's a control mechanism. Okay. Now, in China, they're literally using this technology to track people and to organize what their thoughts are. Like if you say something on Twitter off the cuff, you may be having a bad day or maybe got a little bit upset over some decision by the court system or the way one political party is acting. Guess what, brothers and sisters in Christ? Guess what? This is going to be there for them to grab hold of. Now in China, that's very easy. Now you're like, well, this can never happen. Well, who had thought Google would be using their technical skills to even support China in their nefarious activities of controlling people without any freedom of speech? Now, interestingly, this is a whole nother topic. Now, I cannot ask you guys to hang on to this. There's going to be too much information. We are already past the 10-minute mark when it comes to this, so I'm gonna have to learn how to figure out how to scale down this kind of information. But what the point of it is, at the end of the day, is that they'll use their powers to censor you like they did James Wood, which we talked about yesterday. Okay, now I'm not necessarily a James Wood believer. He seemed to have some things that align with my way of thinking, not probably all of them. But the point of it is that when they start using it in other countries to try to suppress the speech of their own people, and not only that, corral them into thinking the way they want them to think, they're just relegating them to robots. They're relegating them to whatever. And brothers and sisters in Christ, when they start having that capability, guess what they're going to do to your values? The ones who have the moral compass built on the framework of God Almighty, right? It's offensive. Our value system is offensive. And guess what? They will go out of their way to stick their nose into the body of Christ and to try to suppress them in time. That's one thing that you have to face. Another thing that you have to face is that your church or ministry, if you hold information from people, that you may at one time be subject to the absurd private, well, I'm not saying totally absurd, but the very aggressive privacy legislation. They may target Christian churches, Christians in general, and target them to force them to remove data and be aggressive and try to find them in more aggressive ways than other people. Okay, and so your list, your distribution list, your emailer list that you have in your church that you're trying to build up your membership, you're trying to send out email blasts about church coming up. That may not be an option. That may be an option only if you have the correct privacy controls around that. Otherwise, you may end up being bankrupt because someone may sue you. And so this becomes a problem for every business, really. It's not simply the Christian worldview, it could be anyone's. But the point of it is, from a Christian perspective, you need to understand what privacy is. We are in the digital era. right now. And privacy is a huge part of that. You're going to have to learn how to deal with it. You're going to have to get your policies in place to organize your ministry in such a way that you know how to navigate these new privacy laws. My friends, brothers, sisters, it is not easy. Okay, if you need to want to understand a little bit more about this, give give me a call. I do this sort of work. You know, what the point of it is, this isn't a commercial for me, but just if you need help or you want me to address a topic that you don't understand, you're like, JB, this was a half an hour, your third episode of this particular topic. You're all over the board, and I really didn't have as good of an understanding as you. So can you talk about a certain point? You bet I can. Just let me know what that is in the whatever window where we have comments and feedback, and I will do my best to get back with you or to queue up a new topic that addresses this because all of the topics of privacy are a whole industry of themselves. So me talking in this big broad brushstroke right now is going to be a lot to consume for you. And it's going to be tough. You may have specific issues that you need to focus in on. Let me know. Okay, let me know what that is, and I'll try to dedicate a show to simply addressing that for you and the other people who are watching. And if you want to like this, great. If you want to pass this along, great. If you want to just send me a prayer, you can just pray and not even tell me. I would most appreciate that because ultimately this is what it's about. This is what I do, and this is what I do right now, and I'm trying to make sure I get the word out for all you Christian brothers and sisters, pastors and etc., all you leaders for Christ who are trying to make it happen. Hey, look, figure it out for yourself, give me a call, whatever, but this is on the horizon and you need to address it. Burying your head in the sand is no longer an option. Get some understanding of this. Get some wisdom, get insight, get understanding. My brothers and sisters, this is JB signing off of the Cyber Christ in Country program. So until next time, take good care, my friends.